Everyone can look this up if you're listening right now. In 2021, the U.S. Special Forces Perspective, under Mark Milley, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs, put out an entire instruction manual for how the U.S. military can work with the State Department and our intelligence services to organize a rent-a riot, to destabilize a country in order to bring them to the negotiating table. They gave an example of a hypothetical West African country where a member of U.S. Special Forces is on a separate mission, driving down a highway, and notices a billboard for Chinese infrastructure investment into a new port in this Western African country. The unit takes note of this billboard on a highway in Western Africa with Chinese symbols on it. They do their own investigation and figure out that this is part of a real estate development project from Chinese investors, that as part of that development project will have the construction of a Chinese naval port in this West African country, where in theory, China would then be able to project naval influence into the Atlantic Ocean. What the Special Forces Guide calls for is coordination with the State Department, coordination with our intelligence services, coordination with our psychological operations unit to take all of our assets in that West African region. And in that case, what they did is they planned to work with the unions. What they did is they embarked in a social media influence campaign. They would activate all their media assets, all of their civil society institutional assets, and all of their union assets to have the union labor pool in that West African country. Well, actually, there was one thing that happened first, is they first then went, in this hypothetical, the State Department sent a delegation to persuade the West African country to forbid the development license to the Chinese developer. And the head of that West African government said no. Because something was happening in the hypothetical in the next 30 days, there was a time sensitivity to generate an instability event to stop this using time-sensitive emergency. And so the way they generated that was they worked with their union contacts in the region and the media contacts in the region and created this whole social media campaign to inflame the sentiments of the West African labor union workforce who were working for Chinese companies at the time. Because in this hypothetical, the Chinese mining firms and Chinese industry, was employing a lot of these Africans. And it was to destabilize the country, to bring the mines, to bring the factories, to bring all of the Chinese production in the region to a halt, and to put all these Africans out of jobs, and to bring the African government effectively to a standstill. At the same time, in their own Special Forces manual, it called for support from U.S. aid to provide these same striking miners alternative jobs, so that while they were striking from the Chinese labor companies, they were still getting paid by U.S. taxpayers. So they were financially bribed effectively to boycott Chinese industry and to devastate their own country's government, create this crisis, and then use the State Department delegation to go back to the negotiating table with the West African government and promised to end the destabilization if the development was halted. And in that hypothetical, the West African government then rejects the license for the real estate development of China, and that is declared